everyone. It's us. You know who we are. If you don't, hi, I'm Megan. This is Joshua, and we run Digital Hammurabi, which is this wonderful YouTube channel and also website and Twitter and 8 million other things. I'm not entirely sure how we keep track of it. I suspect the answer is we don't.
Yeah, we don't.
We just kind of keep going and eventually things get done.
I noticed today that somebody posted something on something we have called Discord.
We have Discord. That I forget we have, to be honest.
Yeah.
But we do have one. Anyway, hi, it's nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. Today we probably won't be here more than an hour. But we finally got Josh's slavery book published, so that is out, and we wanted to talk to you about that and tell you kind of what it is and what's inside it, and so you can kind of evaluate if it's something you would like to own. Yeah. There might be a dog appearing at some point. I will probably leave also because of the dog, because he is not housebroken yet, and I do not want more puddles to clean up.
No.
So, Josh will be looking after you very capably. We will also be taking a couple of questions if we have time. So if you do have a question, please put them in the side chat. If you do that, please, for the love of whatever it is you hold most holy, tag us, because Josh is functionally blind, and I am a little bit scatterbrained. So, yes. Tag us, because that way it comes up in nice big orange letters so we can't miss it.
Very good. Well, I'm really excited about the book, and I have noticed that there is some...
yeah, apparently someone's going to burn it.
I see Jay Pasick.
Which is exciting. I kind of thought as a culture we'd move beyond burning books, but apparently not.
No,
so, I mean, if you want to burn it, I'm not going to stop you. It's available on Amazon. Buy a copy, burn it. I mean, I honestly prefer that you read it.
Yes, it would be better.
But if you read it and then feel like burning it, knock yourself out.
So what I wanted to do was just kind of celebrate with all of you, because this has been, it's not a fun book to read, but it's been a book that...
No, I proofread it.
Yeah, it's not fun. However, I do think that it's relatively balanced. At least that's what my goal was. And I think it presents some of the most common arguments and counter arguments, whatever.
And looks at the most debated passages in some detail.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I particularly enjoyed, and I have to confess, I've only read it the once when I was proofreading and formatting.
But it changed your life.
It definitely changed my life. What you do get in this book is a massively detailed survey on what people who have spent their whole lives looking at ancient Near Eastern law, looking at the Hebrew Bible, looking at slavery, what they say, which doesn't mean they're right, but it means that you, as a layperson, have a good understanding of where the field as a whole stands, which is quite helpful. Yeah. Yes, it is available on Amazon.
The links are in the description of this video.
Paperback and Kindle, and people are suggesting that maybe a Kindle version would be tricky to burn.
Yes,
which,
perhaps.
I mean, you make a good point. So if you do want to burn it, I would recommend the paperback version. Slightly more expensive. Yes. But less toxic when burnt.
That's true. Also, if our mods would like to put the links, I saved them. I'm really impressed with myself. I saved them as tiny URLs. But if you want to put them in the side chat for people that are asking, that would be fantastic. So maybe what I can do is, while you guys, if you do have questions, again, tag us in the side chat. I can already see the orange. I can't see what it says, but I can see the orange or red or whatever that is. But what I'd like to do is, if you guys can see that, I kind of wanted to walk through the table of contents so that everybody has an idea of what's coming. Question about audiobook. Yes, I recorded. So I'm reading it. Sorry. Maybe we'll also have a version where Megan reads it. But I recorded the preface, the acknowledgments, the introduction, chapters 1 and 2 today. So it's with those things about a half. I guess we're about halfway through. It's an hour and 45 minutes reading it. So it's probably going to be like a 3.5 hour, 4 hour book. So not terribly lengthy as I guess as books go. But it's about 200 pages, I guess, of text. Anyway, so that is coming. Obviously, Megan will have to do some editing. But I wanted to walk you through it, and you guys can definitely ask questions about the chapters if you want more information on what it is. But chapter 1, even though it's just one line there, basically what I'm doing is walking through slavery in the Old Testament in general. So it's designed to just give you a really good overview of how slavery, from a legal sense, as the laws ostensibly were, how the laws in the Hebrew Bible were laid out. Then chapter 2 does the same thing, but for the ancient Near East. So you can see there I give a general overview on what ancient Near Eastern law was like. So, there's always this discussion that you hear about, were these normative laws, what is a law code? Were these, did judges look back at these laws to make decisions, or what was the nature of ancient Near Eastern law? And so I talk about that, and I talk about the legal tradition that existed in the ancient Near East, most likely. And so we get into that a little bit. And then we talk about some of the specifics. So we discuss debt and chattel slavery, what the differences are, what existed. And then we talk about slaves' rights and legal standing. Now, I wanted to talk about that in some detail throughout the book, because one of the things that you hear all the time is that the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, makes great improvements and is vastly different from slavery as it obtained in the ancient Near East, and that's just not the case. So we go into some detail about that. There's no question that, and particularly in like the book of Deuteronomy and in Leviticus 25, particularly as it pertains to the treatment of fellow Israelites, there are definite developments in slavery there. But on the whole, the argument, I don't think it's a sound argument to make to say, oh, the Hebrew Bible is so much better than the wicked, awful type of slavery that was practiced in the ancient Near East. I just don't think you can make those kinds of distinctions. So talk about that. And then we talk about the protection of foreigners, which again is not just something that you see in the Hebrew Bible. It's something that you see quite commonly, actually, in the wider ancient Near East. So then chapter 3 goes into commentary on the specific passages that deal with the legal text. So I don't get into things like Jeremiah 34 or Nehemiah 5, those passages that talk about how or describe how slavery was practiced necessarily, because there's a difference between what I wanted to focus in on primarily in this book was what were God's commands, right? What were the legal stipulations as presented in the biblical text? So we look at Exodus 21, and there's you see there Hebrew debt slave or foreigner. There is the passage there deals with the Eved Ivri, which is the Hebrew slave. Some people have made the argument that these are the Habiru or the Hapiru. So I talk about that at length and why I don't think this is a foreign slave being described in Exodus 21. We talk about the language of purchasing slaves. So does it just mean to acquire them, or does it actually mean to purchase them? We discuss that. The difference between the male slave's release and the non-release of the maidservant, and did the maidservant have agency in that transaction? Was she selling herself? Was it her decision to sell herself as a wife or a concubine, or was this a decision that was made for her? We talk about Exodus 21:16 with the kidnapping, the verse about kidnapping and how that's used to sort of say, well, there must not have been any slavery in the Hebrew Bible, because you can't kidnap people. And of course, we talk about how you couldn't do that in the ancient Near East either. And of course, because of that, nobody would argue. I don't think the people that would argue against slavery in the Hebrew Bible would argue against slavery in the ancient Near East, and yet you see many, many similarities between the laws set forth. Protections against physical abuse. So this is one of those areas where I think both sides probably go a little extreme. And so my goal here was to sort of bring it back to the middle. You'll see that there were things in place to keep the slaves from being abused, but of course what we mean by abuse is very different today, I think, than what obtained then. Then we discuss the goring ox. So this is important primarily because it gives an idea into the difference, the way that the slave was treated in that situation of an ox goring someone, how they're treated under property law as opposed to family law, which is important for the discussion. Then in Deuteronomy 15, we talk about the difference, because in Deuteronomy 15, you see the female slave is also released as the male slave was in Exodus 21. So we discuss why that is, some possibilities. Then you see the big development in Deuteronomy 15, which is the release with provisions. So the slave, when he is released or she is released, is to be not just let go after 6 years, but to be provided for liberally, which was definitely an improvement. The problem is that, there are lots of problems with it, I suppose, from a historical standpoint, but it required supernatural intervention according to the text. So that was an important distinction that we talk about. I slipped Deuteronomy 20 in there, not so much because it necessarily deals at length with slavery, but more because people often cite Deuteronomy 20 in its connection, or in an argued connection. I don't think there is one, but a connection that's argued between Deuteronomy 20, about the rules of warfare, and Leviticus 25 with the foreign slaves. And then finally, the big passage that probably everybody, Exodus 21, 20 to 21, and Leviticus 25, 44 to 46 are probably the two big passages that most everybody wants to see. And so I deal at length with River, get down.
Hey, no.
I deal at length with Leviticus 25, talk about the chapter as a whole, then talk about, the word achuzah, for example. Does it actually mean property? Talk about the word rigor. So, I deal with the passage as a whole and then some of the more specific things there. So that's chapter 3. Then chapter 4, Megan is now in control of the mouse. But if you would just scroll down to chapters, there we go, perfect.
Welcome.
Chapter 4 is other common objections that I see on social media to the topic of slavery, and particularly its reality in the Hebrew Bible. I know that objections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are not terribly descriptive. I kind of wanted to leave a little bit of mystery. But we deal with things like, probably the one that comes up the most is the Leviticus 19, 33, 34, where it talks about you have to treat foreigners like yourself, treat them well. How could you treat a foreigner well and yet still have slaves. So we deal with that. We deal with the word olam as used in Leviticus 25:45, I think. It's either 44 to 45, where it talks about you can keep the foreign slave forever, le'olam. What does that mean? Does it really mean forever?
Yes, it does.
It does it definitely does in the sense of no end in sight. But we talk about that. Can't remember what all the other objections are off the top of my head, but I think there are some interesting ones. And then we have, I think, some fairly useful appendices, which really took a lot of time in the editing process. So every time you, of course, change a page, you add some information or take it away, it changes the whole pagination, which then means I have to go back and find
redo the indices.
But they're done.
So every we don't have the indices there. Every biblical passage that is cited is in an index. So if you're interested in a particular passage, you can flip to the index and find all the pages where that comes up. Same with Near Eastern texts, and it's not listed there for some reason, but also the New Testament texts.
Oh, there, right there.
Oh, it is there. I'm just blind. And we have
I've been staring at it.
That's true. And there's a topic index.
Mm-hmm.
Hooray! So if you want to find out about debt slavery, you can look in the index and find debt slavery and then go directly there. And
there is, I didn't want to be... There are different types of bibliographies that you can provide. Because this is a popular level book that's meant for non-specialists, I didn't want this to be some exhaustive bibliography so that you would have to wade through every little article and every little book that's written possibly on the topic of slavery. But that bibliography is pretty extensive for this topic. There are a lot of meaty references in there that you, if you're a non-specialist, you can use, and I think would be very handy. So that is basically the rundown of the book. So we're really excited about it. Mm-hmm. And please go get yourself a copy. We have ordered 10 copies, I think. And are we still doing the... Mm-hmm. So if people would like an autographed copy, you can order, I guess, directly from us, and I'll sign it. I don't know exactly the procedure for that. We were doing that with the Sumerian book as well, because there are some people that wanted it to be signed, which is fine, obviously. Be very happy to do that. Yep. Send us an email, digitalhammurabi@gmail.com. Domestic shipping is $3. $3. I think it's $3.99. Was it? I think so. Okay. Can't remember. Some $3 or $3.99. Can't remember. If you do not live in the continental United States, when you email me, let me know where you are so I can get a shipping quote for you. An SQ. Exactly. And we have some questions. Oh, cool. So, John Robertson. Were chattel slaves let go if they lost an eye or a tooth, or was that only the indentured slaves? Yeah. So, for those that don't know, this is Exodus 21, verses 26 and 27. Part of the problem with Exodus 21 is that it's not entirely clear what's going on in this. Let me be more specific. In the sense that it's tough to tell whether we're talking about chattel slaves or debt slaves. There are some places where it's very clear, like the beginning of the chapter. But it's less clear. So Gregory Kirikinyo, for example, and it's in the bibliography of the book, has a lengthy discussion about this. Are these about debt slaves? Are these about chattel slaves? There are basically 4 different options. It's tough to tell which one's which. That being said, I think if I had to come down on that, I would probably say that it's a general principle. However, there are some really good arguments for saying that it's essentially a debt slave. And you can look at, for example, the Law Code of Hammurabi, and you can see that if, a debt slave, if you have a distrained person and the master beats them to death or something, that there's a punishment there. But that's tough to determine. Is that law just for a debt slave, or is it for both debt and chattel? I would say definitely for debt, which I think most people would, but it's tough to know if it's for both. Sorry, that's not a very helpful.
It's an honest answer.
It is. It's tough.
Okay, Tim Smith. Is the language relating to the yoke of cattle similar to the yoke of slavery?
The yoke of cattle. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the passage, the particular passage or reference. Tim, if you could put that particular passage in the side chat. You talking about just if you're just talking about the verbiage, I mean, I can at least take a look after the stream and post it in the comments or something.
Theo Mackey, what do slave laws in the Bible have in common with neighboring cultures? Do they have similar or even the same laws?
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. In fact, that's a lot of what the book goes through, is trying to show where it's different and where it's the same. So some examples of some things that are very, very similar. You can't, the argument is made all the time. Look, they couldn't have been, in the Hebrew Bible, they couldn't have been chattel slaves, because chattel slaves, if they're chattel, that means that you can just do whatever you want to them. They're like an old beat up sofa, right? Well, that's silly. It's not silly. It makes sense from, the way that we would look at things, the way that we would look at things today from our modern vantage point. Like, if they're property, then you can just do whatever you want with them. Because look, I can do whatever I want with my coffee mug. I've said before, that's not really true. I think that there are laws. I mean, there are obviously laws. You can't like burn your own house down. Or now that I've said that, I'm not a legal specialist. Anyway,
if you can.
Yeah, I think there.
As long as you're not planning on claiming on the insurance.
I don't know that you can actually.
Sure. That would be.
But
bad.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Don't burn your house down.
Yeah, but the point is that's.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, it's not terribly relevant. The point is that just because they were property did not mean it does not mean that they had no rights. They had no legal standing. So I go through, which was not the most necessary, I suppose, thing to do, but I went through some of the rights that slaves had in the Hebrew Bible, as shown in the laws of the Hebrew Bible. But more importantly for the discussion, what rights and what protections slaves in the ancient Near East had. So, for example, under the laws of Hammurabi, and people cite this all the time, they say, oh, look, you could, masters could just cut off the ears of their slaves. Well, they could cut off the ear, but they couldn't just do it if they wanted to. So there's a very specific case in which that would take place. If the slave said, he's not my master, I'm not actually a slave, then that master would have to take the slave to the judges, and the judges would have to see the evidence and see, yes, that is actually your slave. And then at that point, as a marking to show this slave has tried to, ostensibly, this slave has tried to get out of his obligations, you would cut off the ear. But the same is true most likely in Exodus 21, 21:6, where it talks about the awl going through the ear. This is either a tag of some sort, or probably more likely a mutilation of the ear to make it so that there's permanent disfigurement, so that it's clear, this is a permanent chattel slave, right? This is a permanent slave. So some of the things that are different, one thing that always kind of comes up to me is the length of indentured servitude. So indentured servitude is, servitude that's based on a contract. So indentured servitude in, for example, the laws of Hammurabi, the person was to be distrained or to serve for 3 years and then released. Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, they serve for 6. So, in that sense, from our modern standpoint, they're working twice as long. So the Hebrew Bible is actually worse than the laws of Hammurabi. So, but I would say there's much more continuity between the laws seen in the ancient Near East and those that obtained in the the laws in the Hebrew Bible. Much more continuity, and I think because as Westbrook has argued, as I talk about in the book, there's a relatively stable legal tradition or set of traditions that are broadly applicable, I guess, or I can't think of the word anyway.
Elijah Bar-Sobach thinks that you should grow your hair into the same style as mine.
Oh, okay.
It is basically the same. Close. Mine's just a bit longer.
I'll bit.
And actually, when we married, my hair was basically that style.
I'm very beautiful.
You are very beautiful. Your hair was a lot shorter, though. Josh had a military cut when we got married.
Heck yes, I did. I'll do whatever I feel like I want to do. Gosh.
Ultra testosterone. Didn't slaves in the Bible have far more rights than chattel slaves in the Deep South?
So this is one of those things that I'll give my standard, as my professor used to say. Our professor used to say, "It's not my field. It's not my field. It's not my field." Of course, it was his field when he said it, so it was interesting. But so I am certainly not an American historian. So antebellum slavery is not something that I actually know a great deal about. That being said, one of the things that I have always wanted to know, and I should just break down and do some reading. I just have so many other things that I need to read.
With all of your free time.
Were the laws, and I think this is probably the case just from, anyway, were the laws on the books during, the period of antebellum slavery, were they did they provide much more protection than was actually accorded to the slaves? So in other words, I wonder sometimes if when we make this comparison between ancient slavery, be it biblical or ancient Near Eastern, and antebellum slavery, are we comparing laws in the ancient Near East and practice as we saw it in history in the antebellum South? And that's not a fair comparison to make, because what you would want to do is apples to apples here. You'd either want to make the comparison, for example, like looking at Nehemiah 5 or Jeremiah 34, where people aren't released when they're supposed to be, right? They're held and then they're recaptured. That you would want to make how it's practiced compared to how it was practiced, as opposed to, anyway.
Or look at the laws in the Bible,
right? Laws versus laws. That's exactly right.
From the South. I think that the salient point that does come through in the book is that chattel slavery did exist in the ancient Near East. It is referenced in the Bible. It is legalized in the Bible. There are laws standardizing the practice of chattel slavery. You could own another person and pass that person down as inheritance to your children.
Yep.
How you treated them, I can't speak for how that compares to antebellum slavery, but chattel slavery existed in the Bible. I realized I missed a question from Trevor Lunn, and we always enjoy Trevor's questions. How long before a Jubilee year should I sell you one of my future children as an indentured servant in lieu of payment for one Kindle and one paperback version of the book?
I'm thinking that's not a serious question.
It's not a serious question, but it is an excellent question.
I always love these questions.
And we have a serious question from Trevor. Is there any Old Testament attribution to Yahweh, as in the Lord said, saying or even hinting that any form of slavery is bad?
Yes. So, and this is one of the very difficult points. This is one of the things that's, I think, very difficult for someone who is trying to argue that slavery was a good thing. In other words, that it was some sort of a beneficial thing. Let me give a bit of a background of what I mean. So there are several different approaches that apologists take when I either hear them talking or they're talking to me when it comes to slavery and its defense in the Hebrew Bible. And one is to say there wasn't slavery, right? It was really, really, you're misreading these passages. You know, in other words, you don't understand what they're saying. But then the other, and it's in the same vein, but it's different, is that people wanted to become slaves, right? They wanted to enter into this. It was something that was beneficial because it protected them, or it gave them food, or, you know, those sorts of things. And, you know, the bad thing about these arguments is there's a little bit of truth to each one, right? The problem is that they take that bit of that kernel, whatever, and they go too far with it. So Leviticus 25 is actually a really important chapter for this discussion, not just because of the, you know, the typical verses 44 to 46, but also because of what develops in Leviticus 25. So in Exodus 21, which I think, you know, from a consensus standpoint, and I think there's good reason for this, Exodus 21 is probably the oldest. The Covenant Code is the oldest of the three passages that talk about slavery in the legal texts, followed by Deuteronomy 15 and then Leviticus 25 and the Holiness Code. In Exodus 21, it says you can take an Israelite as an eved, right? As a slave, as a bondservant, as an indentured servant. But you got to release him after 6 years. Take him for 6, and then he goes out. When Deuteronomy 15 comes up, same thing is true. You can take a servant, an Israelite as a slave, and you keep them for 6 years and they go out free. But when they go out, now you have to provide, you give them a lot of provisions, right? So that they can make a fresh start and not fall back into poverty. When you get to Leviticus 25, however, there's a development that's even more substantial. And that is, the text says you can no longer treat a fellow Israelite as an eved. You can't do it. You have to treat them as a hired worker, which is a big development, because now you can't treat them as an eved any longer. And the question then, I think, naturally arises in the text, well, where do we get our eveds from? Now, had the passage stopped there, had it stopped at verse 43, I think you can make a really good case that chronologically, diachronically, God had, you know, phased out slavery. I think that a good case could be made for that, or at least a decent case could be made for that. It'd be difficult. I mean, this is assuming things like we don't have Jeremiah 34. Anyway, it would probably work. But whatever. However, the question arises: where do we get our slaves from? And the text answers it. It says in the Hebrews, actually, it fronts the nouns. So, as for your male and female slaves, you couldn't get them from the Israelites, couldn't get them from, you know, your brethren. As for your male and female slaves, these you may get from the nations around you, the Goyim, and from the people, the resident aliens, or I mean, not the resident, the tenant farmers, whatever you want to call them, the Toshavim, that are dwelling in the land with you. These can, you know, be passed down forever, kept as property and whatever. Okay, so because the text is going to great lengths to say you can't treat your fellow Israelites this way anymore. Eved, bad, right? Slavery, bad. This is not. If you're an Israelite. If you're an Israelite, this is not preferable. In the same way that you can't, you couldn't loan at interest money to your brethren, right? Because that's bad. That, it's not like morally bad, I suppose, but it's not. It'd be much more beneficial to Megan if somebody loaned her money not at interest or interest-free loan, right? And so you can't loan at interest to your fellow Israelites. You can't treat them as eveds. It's not a desirable position to be in. And so, yes, to answer the question, that was the longest way that I could possibly answer a question. I would say that the Old Testament does say it's not desirable to be a slave. That doesn't mean that the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, did not endorse slavery, because I think it most certainly did.
We have 2 super chats.
Oh, snizzle. Oh, okay, that means I got to read them, right?
Yep.
Hold on.
It might be clear.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Joni Spinoza for $4.99. Thank you, Joni. Okay, yeah. Yep, heard quite a few preachers, like me, okay, treat slavery like it's a beneficent welfare program. Disgusting. Well, I suppose if you think about it, God sort of evolved the practice over the passages, okay? I'm here to help. Oh, and Michael, the Canadian atheist, for $5. I really like Michael, and I hope he comes around to seeing that evolution is the dumbest religion in the world, okay? And he says, do a bit of Hovind, please. Oh, well, let me tell you. Let me try to impersonate Dr. Josh. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's not my feeling. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The dog enjoyed that.
Yes, he did.
So we have a comment rather than a question from Ethiopia, saying, I'm not an antebellum slavery guy either. He or she is a classicist. But I can say at least this: every slave state set its own rules. So talking about a comparison between antebellum slavery and biblical slavery is a complicated question.
It's very interesting because there's a book. It's in the bibliography. Laura Culbertson edited it, and it's 2011. It was a symposium, I think, that they did. Anyway, and in the opening chapter, she talks about the difficulties in defining slavery in the ancient world, just in general, but in the ancient world in particular. And she says how does she word it? Many a scholar has lamented the difficulties of defining slavery, because that's exactly right. It's difficult to find a one definition fits all practices or legal.
So another question from Ultra Testosterone: did the laws of slavery change throughout the First and Second Temple Judaism periods?
That's a complicated question, I think. From the standpoint, is it? I suppose it would make me take a harder position, a slightly harder stance on the development of the Pentateuch than I would like at the moment. I will say that there's significant continuity. There's an article by Greenberg, perhaps, where he looks at, I think, Elephantine. There's a Jewish community in Elephantine, Egypt, that I think that's where it was. I think that's where the case came from, or the text came from. And then, I can't remember off the top of my head. But then it looks at whatever the earlier case was. It looks then at that, and it looks at rabbinic practices or
writings.
Yeah, rabbinic texts, and shows the continuity between them, with the idea that I think he's looking specifically at buying and selling slaves, and how that. Okay, now I can't remember precisely. It's been a while since I've read it, but it's. If somebody emails me, I can get the art. Actually, I'm sure it's cited in the bibliography. So
there we go. Michael Roble: isn't modern U.S. military service a form of indentured servitude? You can sign a binding contract to serve for a certain number of years under the penalty of law.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem with comparisons like that, you hear that the military, you hear credit cards, sports players. There is, and I don't know what the fallacy is called, sorry, but saying that because these aspects of like this characteristic and this characteristic match this characteristic and this characteristic over here. Therefore, they must be the same. I think probably something similar to this would be if somebody sees the statue of Michelangelo, well, that must be pornography because it's a naked man. You can see his penis, penis. And of course, even though those are very similar, right? You have naked guy and pornography is a naked guy. That doesn't mean that because those two things are similar. Please don't chew on that.
He really likes this stuff.
That's great.
Hey, stop it.
So, yeah, I mean, there are obvious differences. Certainly, just trying to think of a couple. In the military, you can't beat. You can't beat military personnel. You don't have. What was the other thing I was going to say? I lost it. Can't beat them. That was one thing I was going to say. That was something else. Oh, if I marry another military person and I have children, they don't belong to the military. I guess there are obviously things that do not correlate. So I understand what you're trying to say, or the argument that's being made, but
it's not.
Yeah,
not quite as comparable as it may seem.
Yeah.
So you have another super chat.
Oh,
Mr. Hovland.
Yeah. So please don't lick my face, okay? I mean, I've never seen you produce a non-dog, so, okay. Yeah. So Theomachy for $2. Hey, Kent, what do you think of this book? Well, let me tell you what I think about it. It's a spawn of Satan, okay? Because we all know that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and elephants and pine cones are not related, okay? And so this guy, Josh, that's writing the book, I mean, he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, but his PhD is probably worthless, so not like mine, so...
Theomachy, what was something new you learned researching this book?
I'm trying to think of one thing. I guess the big thing that stands out to me is the first question that came up is trying to ascertain, which laws specifically apply to debt slaves, which laws apply to chattel slaves. Also, that some of these verses, although they sound incredibly straightforward, are anything but. Exodus 21:16 is one of them. The famous kidnapping verse, so the kidnapping law. Not straightforward at all, right? So the argument's made. Well, hey, look, it says you can't kidnap. If you kidnap somebody, or even if you're found with somebody that's kidnapped, you die, right? So, but the problem is that a very good argument can be made to say that that's only for Israelites. Anyway, and we talk about that in the book. So, yeah, very difficult, and it's a complex issue, and I think everybody. Skeptic, Christian, apologist, whatever, everybody can benefit from looking a little more closely at the data and really trying to ascertain what is it that not only the Hebrew Bible says, but and what scholars say the Hebrew Bible says, but what they also say is going on in the ancient Near East. So.
John Robertson, were chattel slaves that were used for sex and making children treated as concubines, or were they treated as wives of their masters, or was each a possibility?
Yeah, I'd say each was a possibility. It's another topic that's actually not entirely straightforward in the text itself. But yeah, I think probably the likelihood is the law allowed for both. One thing that is absolutely true is that while I don't think that we can get away from the fact that passages like Deuteronomy 21 and Exodus 21 are describing non-consensual marriage and ultimately non-consensual sexual relations, which by modern definitions, this is rape. While we can't get away from that, I don't think it might not be it might not be in keeping with the spirit of the text of the law to say things blanketly like God condones rape or God endorses rape. Now, that being said, again, I've just said that a captive, woman in Deuteronomy 21 or Numbers 31, they're taken as plunder, right? Their property. They're and given a month to mourn for their father and mother, and then they're made a wife, and that's not something that they decide. Even Exodus 21 with the 𝒭, that's not something that she decides. The text is actually pretty clear about that. So yeah, this is non-consensual sexual relations, and if you press me on it, I'm going to say, yeah, I would define that as rape today. But I think that the connotations of rape today, I guess it would be like using the word abuse to talk about a father that spanks his child, or that spanked his child 50 years ago. I don't think it would be fair. Trying to think of that, actually thinking this through as I say it. Does that make sense what I'm saying here?
It does. We would view it as rape. It is rape. But to the people committing the acts, to the people living through that time, it was part of life. It
was not what I guess what I would say is that the intent, given what our moral understanding is today, our moral development today, and what we understand rape to be, the intent of a person doing it today and the intent of a person doing it then would be very different. And I think that that's mitigating in my mind, or at least it's incredibly important. So even though today I haven't read the secondary literature on spanking, so I'm sorry about that. But if it's true, and I think it probably is, that corporal punishment is a form of abuse, at least in some of its forms. Why do you keep scratching me? It's like, shut up, Dad. That I don't think it's fair to impose or to transfer that intent back 50 years to say that a father spanking his child, or even back to biblical times or ancient Near Eastern times, a father using a wooden rod on his son, that there's intent there to abuse, if that makes sense. Even though I think it is abuse, we can't say that he intended to abuse, that he had the knowledge that this was abuse. In fact, if you look at the proverbial text, they would say that this is what you're supposed to do. If you don't do it, you don't love your child. But we talk about that in the book. All right, enough about that.
Tim Smith says that he just bought the book on Amazon and is looking forward to it. Tim, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your support.
Aw, snizzle.
And I hope you enjoy it, or at least find it. I think enjoy is maybe an odd word to use. I hope you find it enlightening, or at least helpful. I Longhornful, why don't you say, I'm going to handle this one. Why don't you say a word about the Quran and its teachings? For the same reason that we don't talk about Buddha, we don't talk about Hindu scriptures. Neither of us have any training in the Quran.
Also, it's really hard to spell. It's like Q. I don't even know.
We're not experts in Islamic religion. We're not Islamicists. We're Assyriologists. Josh has a long and detailed background in Hebrew Bible studies. It would be very, very...
It would be
dumb of us to take on the Quran, because neither of us understand it. Neither of us have any training in the this subject.
And I would say you'll notice if you listen for a while that I don't talk about the New Testament all that often. Same reason. And I have a lot of training in the New Testament, but because I don't think it's a field of specialization for me, I stay away from it.
There's a word I'm looking for and I can't.
Boss?
No.
Dizzle?
No.
Contiguous?
Not contiguous. But I love you for trying. Less than 3. This is irrelevant to the subject, but I was curious if you think the Bible clearly describes the earth as flat.
Yes. That was easy.
Perfect.
No, I mean, I don't think there's any question. I find it interesting. Actually, today on Twitter, I saw some people talking about this. You know, the flood wasn't global. Well, of course, the flood wasn't global. It's a weird word to use. They didn't think of it. They didn't know it was a globe. You know, so, but yeah, I don't think there's any question that ancient Near Eastern cosmic geography is a flat Earth, and it's one that had ends. And it's, you know, if you look at the Babylonian map of the world, for example, or actually, there's just a really great book by Horowitz, ancient Near Eastern cosmic geography. Cosmic geography. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely, it describes it as flat. Yeah.
We have the same person asking whether we plan to focus on the Quran and Islam. I think we've probably dealt with this. We have more problems with Islamists than a Kent Hovind. So if you're new to the channel, you may not realize this. We are primarily an historical educational channel. Josh does a lot of debating and talking with Christian apologists on the Skylar Fiction Show. This channel, Digital Hammurabi, is about the ancient Near East. It's about the texts and the lives of the people who wrote them and the archaeology. Like, we're not here to combat Christianity. We're here to provide people with good, solid, scholarly information so they can make their own minds up about what the Hebrew Bible says, how people treated women, like the history of the matter, rather than like waging some kind of anti-religious campaign. Like, if you're new, you probably don't know I'm a Christian. I'm sorry.
And she still sleeps with me.
I do. Yeah. Well done. So no, we're not planning on focusing on the Quran or Islam, or Hinduism.
However, if, you know, someone wants to point out that the Quran says that the ancient Near East practiced X this way, I'd still probably feel I'd have to rely on someone else's expertise to tell me what the Quran says.
Islamicist on and talk about it.
Yeah.
Ethiopia, what is the balance in the book between information on slavery in the wider ancient Near East and information specific to the Hebrew Bible?
I'd say it's probably 60-40. So 60% Hebrew Bible, 40% ancient Near East. So again, chapter 1 is an overview of the Hebrew Bible, slavery in the Hebrew Bible. Chapter 2 is an overview of slavery in the ancient Near East, and that's through all the periods. So it would be very difficult to hone in on one period, or, to specialize in each period, because it would take forever. Mm-hmm. But it's just broad strokes. What are the commonalities? What's the legal tradition look like? And then even in the exegetical sections and in the questions, you see a lot of ancient Near Eastern material because it's making those connections because they're required. In the kidnapping chapter, the kidnapping section of Exodus 21, you have to talk about, the laws of Hammurabi, or you have to talk about, what happens in the ancient Near East when there's, kidnapping. So, okay.
Yep. Brock, hi Brock, says congratulations on the book release.
Oh, cool.
BigZebra.com, off question topic. What kind of dog is that? That is a miniature golden doodle. And he's, 20 weeks old now? He's a good dog. It's very exciting. Josh has not had a dog neither of us have had a dog for a while. Josh is adapting magnificently.
That's very sweet of you.
Michael, the Canadian atheist, do you have copies of your book? Can I buy a signed copy directly while I wait for the audio? Yes, you can. If you email us, digitalhammurabi@gmail.com, tell me where I'm shipping to so I can give you an accurate shipping quote. Continental US is either $3 or $3.99. We can't remember. I need to go back and look again. But yes, email me and we will send you a copy.
Yeah, we ordered them today. We ordered 10 copies today. They should be here in the next couple of days, I would think.
Yep. Michael Roble, going back to the military thing, you can end up in prison for violating your military contract. You don't have the option of quitting.
Well, I mean, it's far more complicated than that. And I, having been in the military for 10 years, I feel like I'm qualified to say that. It's far more complicated than that. And again, making certain connections between them. For example, we can't say in any way that, I think a much closer parallel would be someone going to prison. Not to indentured servitude, but to like chattel slavery. Sorry, to be clear about that. But that doesn't mean that you would classify someone in prison as being a slave. It's a mistake that's made, I think, a lot. And again, I think it's to try to make a point. Again, but when I hear these arguments, and I'm not saying, Michael, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but oftentimes when I hear these arguments, it's like prong number one attack, or method one attack. Well, it's look, we do stuff like this today, right? The problem is that so it's trying to say it's not as bad as you're saying. And I think, a very clear way to think about this, once you understand what the text is saying and what the descriptions are, there's a great Office episode that I think is absolutely perfect for this. And that is when they find out that one of the employees has been to prison. And that employee says, prison was so much better than working here. We had a much bigger television than the one that's in the break room. We got all kinds of free time outside every day. We could lift weights. We could do all these things. And Michael really takes it to heart and, really thinks that, oh my gosh, prison is better. It's genuinely better. Because again, they're making, look, this is similar to this in these ways, therefore they're the same, and now we can make this broad comparison. And I think the same is true here. There's no comparison really ultimately to be made between no real comparison, no substantive comparison to be made between indentured servitude and the military, in my opinion, primarily because if somebody tried to do it, it would be illegal today, and there's reasons that it would be illegal today. Anyway, sorry.
Brock says, the fact that you have created a legit book as a result of dealing with interesting internet people gives the rest of us hope as we deal with them as well.
And I know what he's referencing. Thank you, Brack. That is incredibly kind.
John Robertson. If you have questions, get them in now because we're going to be finishing up soon. Does the text make a distinction between handmaidens and non-maiden women bondservants?
Possibly.
I love it when you start answers like that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay, so I think probably so. This is where I was talking about the different positions on Deuteronomy 15. So in Exodus 21, you have a very definite statement that is made that Amaz, maidservants, do not go free, as the male servants do. They do not yatzah, they do not go out as the maidservants do, or as the male servants do. So, but what we have in Exodus 21, I think, is very clearly a maidservant that is being given as a wife or a concubine. And in that circumstance, this would not be a 6-year contract. You couldn't be giving a wife or a concubine for a set period. It would be a permanent arrangement. In Deuteronomy 15, it may be I don't know. It's hard to know. It may be that they've done away with the female wife possibility, that the Amma would not be coming as a female wife, or as a female wife, as a, you know what? The female slave as a wife. Leave me alone.
Go with it. You're great.
The female wife. And that statement in Deuteronomy 15 that you will also do this for your female slaves is also describing just a regular female bondservant. It's tough. It's tough to know which one that is. I tend to think that Deuteronomy 15 is just talking about a regular female bondservant. But it's not clear.
I think that's the takeaway from the evening. It's not clear.
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. The thing is, on the big points,
yes,
it is clear.
There were slaves.
Yeah.
There was chattel slavery. It happened. Theo Mackie, are you guys planning on writing another book soon? It'd be cool to see a book on Assyrian myths. Bring on the Lamassu. Soon is a relative term. Josh will be doing his second Sumerian grammar within the next year and a half. And he's dying a little inside.
That was in order.
I say that.
Just so you know, everybody, you saw it live. Megan, that was Megan commanding me.
Although when you say mythology, Theo, I've actually been planning on writing a book on Mesopotamian myth for a while. I need the time and the space to sit down and do it. And relating to Richard Madsen's question a little further down, oh no, not Richard Madsen. Rocks always produce rocks. Relating to his question, Hammurabi number 4 is expected early August, so I'm not sure I'll have time to write a mythological book before then. We'll see.
One of the things that happens, like this book was a product of, I'd done so much research and made so many scripts for videos that I thought, you know what, I'm like 80% there. Let me just put it into book format. That's
clearly the answer. I need to make a video series on mythology.
It's
just write it all.
It's possible. I'm seriously considering doing this also with the Daniel videos that I've put together, because it took a lot of time to research that. That one's going to require some more research,
yeah.
Particularly in like Daniel chapter 9, to be able to present the many different views of Daniel chapter 9.
So we have 3 ideas.
Yes.
The Daniel one is at least partially written. So yes, there will be more books. Again, soon is a relative term. So we'll see. Theo, again, what is the Akkadian word for slave?
Wardum.
There we go. Skylar Fiction. I was hoping to catch Dr. Josh apologizing for something. Did I miss it?
I am so sorry, Skylar, that you missed it. And I apologize profusely. I just want to take this time to say that I'm sorry for how often I apologize. Sorry.
You're adorable. Trevor Lunn, one more Kindle sale of the new book just processed. Thank you, Trevor. It was the on-camera cuteness that convinced me. See, this is what we need to do. We need to take pictures of the dog.
Yeah.
Put it on the covers, and then in very small letters underneath write,
"You want to buy this book?"
Well, I was going to go with like biblical slavery, but with a really cute dog on the front.
And our CD.
Yeah, I think that could work. Questions. Oh, we've seen that one. Okay. Last suggestion. Suggested title for your Daniel book: 50 Shades of Daniel. Yep. Sorry, we've got McAfee pop-ups going on. Title suggestion for the second Sumerian book: How to Teach Your Sumerian Grammar to Suck Eggs.
What?
Have you never heard the expression teaching your grandmother to suck eggs?
No.
It's an expression.
I have said, Well, I'll be a suck egg mule.
Which is, I don't understand that. And finally, rocks always produce non-rocks. Will Joshua be on another Aaron Ra video?
I don't know. I should go on, if he would want me to, and promote the book. But I think he's probably like, I don't want to talk about slavery again. No. I get that response a lot from people. Are you familiar with the term ad nauseum?
And last question, and then we are going because I need to pass out in bed. We spent a lot of today painting, and painting is tiring. My arms hurt. Theo, what is the harshest law you found in this research from the Near East?
Nothing really stands out as harsh. I mean, comparatively speaking, I don't think. Obviously, compared to what we would do today, like we wouldn't have slaves, but. I mean, in the Middle Assyrian Palace decrees, again, it requires the king to. It requires the king to give his okay and to pass that judgment. But I mean, like, punishments could be kind of severe in the Middle Assyrian Palace decrees. But again, that that wasn't something. Again, it's to drive the point home. That's not something that the owner, the mistress, could just
do on a whim.
Do what you wanted. You can't. In the ancient Near East, including Israel, you can't just treat chattel slaves however you want. It just doesn't work that way. So.
And I know I said last, but last question. John Robertson, will you consider an ancient Near Eastern name for the Little Hammurabi number 4? Probably not, because the names tend to be on the long side, unless we're going biblical. Because names are all sentences.
We could do a sentence in English, though.
Sennacherib.
But we could call him, like, the king is legitimate.
No.
Oh.
No, we're not doing that.
Fine.
Sorry.
The child is legitimate.
It would be bullied incessantly at school. And it doesn't quite fit with the names that we currently have.
Fine.
It would be...
We could choose an Amorite name.
No one likes Amorites.
I won't tell your advisor that.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you to everyone who has purchased a book or emailed us about a signed copy.
You will buy a book now.
We genuinely appreciate your support. Believe it or not, stuff like this, keeps us both very happy, because it means that we get to do the thing that we love and are unable to do as paid employment. And it means that we get to do things like pay our internet bills and our web hosting costs, which we greatly appreciate. Also, you guys are just awesome.
Yeah.
Great questions.
I think just being able to interact with everybody about stuff that I spent 15 years working on is
a nice thing.
Well.
Okay, bedtime.
Yeah.
Thank you all. It was nice to see everybody. Would you like to take us out?
Yeah. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, resist poor Sky. I almost did Skylar's outro there. Subscribe and make the world a better place. No.
I mean, do that too.
Yeah, I can. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So, resist poor scholarship. This is very smooth, seamless. Always ask, how do you know that?